This is the Thrive Podcast with Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. And now, Pastor Fred Jeff Smith.
Hello, and welcome to the 33rd edition of the Thrive Podcast with the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. I'm Fred Jeff Smith, pastor of Shiloh, and I'm very happy that you took the time to either view this on YouTube or listen to it on iTunes, and I am extremely happy today to have a mentor, a colleague, a friend, Pastor Raymond Jetson of MetroMorphosis. I wanted to say Star Hill Baptist Church, but MetroMorphosis. Pastor Jetson, thank you so much for
Pastor
coming
Smith,
by.
thank
and
you,
I hope
sir.
you don't mind me still calling you
No,
Pastor.
sir.
I know you've walked away from the pastorate, but in my mind, you'll always be Pastor Jetson. Thank you for taking the time to come and share with us. I wanted to get you on. I wanted to get you on for some time. I wanted you to have the opportunity to talk about MetroMorphosis. So without going to all the other things that I normally do with others, tell us who you are, because I think people know who you are. Tell us about MetroMorphosis.
First of all, Pastor Smith, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here. And as it relates to being called pastor, I have resigned myself to the fact that pastor will be my first name for the rest of my life.
Yes, sir.
And it is an honorable title, and so I am thankful for that. I also want to commend you for the podcast and for the YouTube presence and for taking the ministry of reaching people and touching people into different places and to different ways. That there is a tremendous relevance to the leadership and the work that you are doing, and I just love what I see Shiloh doing in this community, in this state, and in this country, and I want to commend you for that leadership.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
MetroMorphosis, we describe MetroMorphosis as we exist to help people and organizations transform broken and neglected communities into thriving places to live, work, and to experience success. Our focus is on inner city neighborhoods, urban neighborhoods, which are, especially in our city, overwhelmingly populated by people of color.
Right.
And so that is our work. How do we transform those communities? And we believe that transformation begins within. So very often when we talk about inner city communities, the conversation is a deficit-based one. What's wrong with this? What's wrong with that? Who's doing or not doing? And we believe that there are tremendous assets in inner city neighborhoods, and that part of what we are to do is to work with them, to connect with them, so that their efforts are strengthened, so that we begin to bring about transformation. We have a few initiatives that we undertake. Probably the most noted one in this season is the Urban Congress on African American Males,
Right.
Where we are committed to transforming the narrative and the experiences of black boys and men in our city. We've identified 7 critical areas and public policy issues that we are working on to bring about that change. We also do work with families who live in neighborhoods where there are low-performing schools, and we bridge that gap between family and school so that children's educational experiences are enhanced. And we also do a year-long leadership development initiative that's focused on equipping people for the type of leadership that's necessary to deal with the realities that we see in inner city neighborhoods. And so those are our 3 core efforts. We are currently incubating a couple of initiatives. We have one that is Launch BR, where we are actually taking people who do lawn care and landscaping, and we are taking them through a 14-week program that is half focused on being a strong business, and the second half is giving them technology in water management, green technology, how to deal with runoffs and build permeable sidewalks, how to deal with the water issue in communities, and helping them to get subcontracts, bid on contracts, and other things. And we are just doing a project with barbers and blood pressure.
I noticed that, yes.
Yeah, barbers and blood pressure. And so we are looking for different ways to address the challenges that we face while building upon the assets that we see in our communities.
there's a lot of creativity in the programs that you all are sponsoring. It's a unique way of looking at things. First thing that I sense reading your information and talking with you in the past is that there's a psychological factor that has to be addressed with inner city families, inner city young people, where people have to stop thinking of themselves in a negative fashion, have to be trained how to not think of themselves in a negative fashion and how to respond to those who tend to think of them in a negative fashion. So how do you incorporate that kind of psychological training into what you do?
So first of all, Pastor, it is amazing to me that you would hone in on that, because one of the most surprising things to me in this process is how many people are resistant to being identified as an asset in their community. And it's almost as if they have not seen themselves in that light. And you have people who are doing, and so for example, I had an opportunity to speak with one of the young men who signed up for the lawn care cohort. And I was talking to him and commending him on being an asset and the contribution that he makes to the community. And it wasn't a false humility. He really had not thought of the fact. And here is a man who is sustaining himself and his family and has two other people working for him who would otherwise be very challenged to find employment that is consistent and that pays as well as he pays them. But he didn't understand that he was an asset, and that by investing in him, we are investing in the community, because he can hire more people the more work he has. And so it starts with the language that you use. And so in our culture, in our office, we always speak from an asset-based perspective. And when we talk to people, we talk from an asset-based perspective. When we find ourselves in conversation where people are more focused on deficits and what's wrong, excuse me, we acknowledge that there are challenges, but we quickly assert that there are positives, that are affirming or affirmative factors that are at work in our neighborhoods also. And we challenge people to look at underlying causes rather than just the circumstances and situations that they see.
How is it that we can get our young people past the rhetoric of it's their fault, and you fill in the blank of who they is? White folks' fault, government's fault, police fault, law enforcement, not just police, sheriff's office, whole 9 yards. How do we get past that kind of rhetoric and not say that it's our fault, but it is our responsibility to deal with the situations as they are and not look for pie-in-the-sky, optimistic situations, scenarios that really do not exist?
So one of the things we started or are starting a youth advisory group of young African-American males to speak to us about our work, because we believe that if we are going to serve people, we need to hear from people. And so one of the questions that I ask of a couple of the young men just in conversations, so if that wasn't there, what would hold you back then?
Yeah.
What would hold you back then? What would prevent you from doing what it is that you desire to do most deeply within yourself? One of the things that I find is that with so many, especially of young black boys, they are afraid to speak their best vision for themselves, because in so many instances they've been robbed of them. They've been spoken to in ways that suggest to them that they can't achieve. And so they are afraid to give voice to their best best hopes and their best dreams for themselves. And so what we attempt to do in conversations and programmatically is to say, so how can we address that system and that structure so that it is not the barrier that in some instances may be to some degree, and in other instances is what you imagine it to be.
Counseling 101 suggests that the counselor does not seek to provide solutions for an individual, but seeks to lead the individual to find their own solution. And that's what I hear you saying in what you're having these discussions about. How well is that received? And is there a difference based upon male versus female? I know that the male counseling group that you work with is focused, of course, on young men. But I see that there is a difference in vision, a difference in drive, a difference in motivation, confidence between young black males and young black females. And I have my own reasons as to why I think those things exist. But how is it that MetroMorphosis addresses and overcomes that?
So two things that I will say, Pastor. First of all, even our work that's focused on African American males, we share with folks that it is the Urban Congress on African American males in Baton Rouge, not the Urban Congress of African American males. Okay. And so all people from all walks of life are involved. There are African American females, there are white males, white females, Hispanics who are involved in the effort. So fundamental to the construct of our programming is this notion that people have to identify their solutions, that we can't say, here is what you need to do to make your life better. And I will share with you that has been, at varying times, more challenging than not.
Sure.
We have a lot of people who come into our programming, who come to our monthly work group meetings of the Urban Congress, and they will come and they won't come back. And one of the reasons that some of them won't come back is because they recognize that this is not something that I can be a spectator to, or this is not something that somebody else is going to give me all of the answers. We believe that the voices of the people who are most impacted need to be voices that you hear if you're going to be about doing the work. And it's difficult. And I think that so many of our young men have heard voices in so many different ways, from the music they listen to, from the groups with which they are embedded within in so many instances. Unfortunately, families, schools, other places where they have been given messages that devalue them, that marginalizes them, and I find that it's really challenging in many instances to help them understand who they really are, and the potential that really resides within them. And that's one of the reasons that we made such a significant investment in mentoring programs across the community. Earlier this year, in January, we trained 700 mentors, from across the city. From all kinds of organizations, the large mentoring groups, Big Buddy, Boys and Girls Club, to BREC, to congregations who had men to come and take part, or other mentors to come and take part. And one of the reasons that we provided this training was so that there was this shared understanding of the most effective ways to provide mentoring relationships with young black boys in our community. And we hired a group out of Washington, D.C., whose sole focus is on mentoring boys of color. And one of the things, as a matter of fact, the first part of their teaching was on helping the young male come to grips with their own identity. that self-identity is the first step in helping this young man or boy to actually self-actualize, to come to a place where they are self-aware and good with who they are as a person. But that has to be really, really widespread in our community.
And it takes more than one effort, I would
Yes, it takes more than one effort. And so what we have done is we have about 18 organizations who do mentoring in our community who are part of an initiative called Mentoring BR. And what we have brought them together to do is to agree upon certain standards, to agree upon certain screenings, to agree upon risk management, to come to some type of shared definition of what we mean by the word mentoring in this community. And so, yes, sir, it is an ongoing effort, and it is about touching so many different places. Unfortunately, you and I were fortunate. We grew up in households where we were prepared for school.
Yes.
We were taught from an early age school was important.
Yes.
And even in our moments of acting out, we knew that we had to do well in school. And we understood how to navigate school in order to be successful.
Yeah.
For so many young black boys today, school is the referral into a life of nothingness.
Yeah.
Because when you examine our local school system, where black boys make up less than 40% of the student population, but upwards of 70% of the suspensions and expulsions, when you look at the number of students who are in alternative settings, they are overwhelmingly African American boys. When you look at students who have some type of behavioral or other diagnoses, they are significantly African American males. And so because of an inability in some ways to really relate and draw out the best in young African American boys, the school system for many, and I am not being critical of teachers, it's systemic.
Your mother was a teacher.
My mother was a teacher. My mother-in-law is a teacher. But the system doesn't quite know how to handle black boys in a way that draws out their best self.
It also does not know how to handle people who learn differently
Yes.
from the typical way of learning.
Yes, sir.
I can only speak personally about this from my own son's experience. My son has a learning disability, and from the time that he was in the second grade, he was identified differently in the school system. He was treated differently in the school system. And he was made uncomfortable by the way that he was treated in the school system. And they did it not as a way to shame him. They saw it as a way of helping him. But the help proved to be more detrimental than anything that we could have imagined. And he struggled in the public school system. He finally made it through, and he's doing well at BRCC at this current time. But it was a struggle, and one of the things that I learned is once you are identified,
you carry that.
That goes with you every step of the way. If you're identified as a behavior problem, it goes with you every step of the way. If you're identified as having a learning disability, that goes with you every step of the way. And you are treated differently, not just by faculty and administration, you're also treated differently by your fellow students. And for those who don't have the self-esteem to be able to carry that, it's a very difficult load for them to deal with. And it causes problems in other parts of their lives.
Yes, it does. And so the example, the real life example that you identify is why a part of our efforts and part of our mantra about the work we do is that you have to look at the systems and structures. It's good to have programs that serve people and do things, but every program is limited by its resources. It can only serve so many people. It can only do things to a certain level of success. the issues that we see being made manifest in the lives of people more broadly in inner city neighborhoods, and in particular African American males, in so many different walks of life, are about systems and structures. And we have to understand how these systems work. How do they need to be adjusted? Are there examples where systems are performing in very different ways? You have seen, as have most, if not all, of the people who will be sharing in this podcast, you've seen examples of schools that are all African American boys and 100% of them graduate and go to college and other things. It can be done.
Right.
And so how do we understand the gaps in our system, and how do we as a community say, here is what we want to see for our children? And so looking at systems and structures is a fundamental part of the work of MetroMorphosis. It is also what makes it more challenging for some people to understand how to work with us, because they want us to be all boots on the ground. Right. They want us to be all, grassroots programming. And while that's important, I would rather, and we would organizationally rather, strengthen the capacity of those who are on the ground, while also marshaling their passions and interests to focus on how we can change the systems that we're working in. We use the phrase build, not fix. And by that we mean we are working to build different systems and structures, because we can fix black boys and men. We can fix little black girls and black women. We can fix people in neighborhoods all day long. If the systems with which they are interfacing are not challenged and rearranged in some way, then we'll continue to get the same outcomes that we're receiving.
Social justice is a watchword that has been lifted up over the last, 10 to 15 years. It existed way before that,
yes,
but it received its title, social justice, over the last 10 to 15 years. It's troubling to me that there are some churches, primarily Caucasian churches, that are resistant to the whole idea of social justice, that it's not Christian, that it's not a part of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And yet we interact with these, they want to have these ecumenical gatherings, they want to have these meetings, and they want to have these kumbaya moments where we all gather and hold hands and sing and then sit around tables for 15 minutes and then everybody goes back to their way of life. How can we as the African American church, or as churches of color, of course I'm more concerned about African American churches than anybody else, how can we impress upon Caucasian churches, which have more money, which have more resources at their disposal than we have, the importance of their embracing the reality of social justice, not just as a psychological or sociological construct within our community, but as a fundamental part of the gospel of Jesus. How can you read the gospel of Jesus Christ and not recognize the importance of social justice? And how can white churches ignore that and talk about do well, be well, but don't want to do things about the very systems that you're describing?
So there was,
and there's a lot of accusation in that statement.
Well,
that's my accusation. It's not his accusation. But I honestly feel that way.
Yes, sir. So over the last week or so, there was a video that went viral of a pastor in Dallas, a white pastor in Dallas, who stood up and talked about the great void that you made reference to, and said that, in particular, white churches could no longer talk about the gospel of Christ while supporting the things that he denounced. That they had to, they could not remain silent any longer when black men were being shot, and that they had to, and that he had gone to the funeral for the young man in Dallas, and how moved he was by the descriptions of the young man and the life that he lived. But the pivotal moment for him was he said that he was in a room before the service or at another meeting where it was one of those ecumenical gatherings. There were pastors from all walks of life who were in this room. And he said that when the facilitator left the room, or whoever left the room, they started a conversation, and that the black pastors in the room said to the white pastors in the room that it's good to talk to you in this room, but you have to say something.
Yes.
You have to go back and say something. You can't be silent about these things. And so I think that to the degree that we have the opportunity to be in rooms with individuals who have these pulpits, these larger pulpits where they can speak to their communities, we have to challenge them to do so and to say clearly that not doing so is problematic. I will share with you that one of the most paining things for me as a believer, as someone who loves Jesus Christ and his church, it pains me to see the inability of such a large part of the body of Christ to call wrong wrong.
Yes.
And it's not even close. It's not where you have to be really attentive to see that there are some things happening in our country that are just fundamentally wrong. And it is if we have bartered away the responsibility of being the body of Christ, we have bartered it away for worldly things.
Yes.
And so I will tolerate racism. I will tolerate policies that are harmful to huge segments of our community so that I can get conservative judges. And so it's like we have become barters where we're willing to compromise.
Yes.
For things
yes.
that are temporary and are fleeting, and it's really painful.
It is, and it's troubling to me. Here's the other part of it, and again, this is me talking. Okay, I'm asking him a question. I'm not. Don't assume his views are my views. It's doubly painful to me when I see Negroes going to those churches and putting money in those churches and giving support to those churches. And we'll talk about, I didn't find the Lord until I went to XYZ Christian Center, when they were raised in black churches, raised by black folk, taught how to support the Lord and support the Lord's work in the black community. And when they get in trouble, first thing they do is come back to the black church, because the white church ain't gonna give them a dime to help them pay their light bill, to help them pay their rent, to help them put groceries, to help them put diapers on their babies. But they'll come back for that, and then they'll run over there to the Word Church in order to get fed spiritually. To me, that is as much an indicator of self-hatred. The very things that you're discussing, you're trying to eradicate with young people in our urban centers, as anything else there is. And we aren't talking about children where that's concerned.
No,
we're talking about their parents and their grandparents. This has been going on now in this city for as long, well, I'm 56 years old. It's been going on at least for 40 years, where we have found our way to these Christian centers where we are accepted, and this is what heaven is going to look like. Heaven ain't going to look like white, black, green, yellow anyway. If you have any kind of theological concept at all, there is no flesh and blood, so Jesus says, for those who read the Bible. There is no flesh and blood that enters into the kingdom of heaven. But there is a need for us to at least come to a synthesis of understanding of what it means to be Christian in a basically non-Christian society. And that's what America is. Talk about it any kind of way you want to. America is a pluralistic society. It is not a Christian society. We allow for Christianity just like we allow for Judaism, just like we allow for Buddhism, just like we allow for any other religion or no religion at all. To lie to people and say that we are a Christian nation and then espouse that Christianity must look like this. And for black folk to buy into that foolishness and turn their backs on those churches that are doing the most within these very communities that you are seeking to serve, and then come back when they get in trouble. God forbid that they get in trouble. Then they have to come back to us for the assistance that they need. That, to me, is a self-hatred that is of the worst order. Because not only is it in a child who can be trained better, but it's in their parents and their grandparents who might be beyond the ability to be trained.
There are many examples in our community where we act in ways that are against our own self-interest. And it befuddles me how we arrive at a place where we believe that advancing someone else's agenda is more important or better than creating and advancing our own. And it manifests itself in the spiritual realm, it manifests itself in the economic realm, it manifests itself in so many realms in our community. And it is one of those underlying factors that you can dance on the surface and do all of the things, but until you get to a place where people are challenged to think about themselves and their actions and what their actions really mean, then nothing fundamentally changes.
So you were raised in an African-American home, you were raised in an African-American community, you were raised by two hardworking parents. Your father went into politics before he died. Your mother was a school teacher. In fact, she was one of my school teachers at Baton Rouge High Magnet School. You went into politics for a period of
yes,
time.
Sir.
You've served in state government. You've served in the state legislature. You have pastored a church, and now you are serving as the director of MetroMorphosis and of this mentoring program. As you survey these various aspects of your life and take them all into account in a panoramic type view, what is it that you have gleaned from your survey of it all as to the number one or the number two problems, the one or two problems that most need to be addressed within our community as we seek to move to the next level?
I think chief among them, if not number one, is the challenge that we find truly working collaboratively with one another. Being willing to bring our respective resources to the table and being able to work together to address a particular set of circumstances that we see. So very often you have people who are protective of their turf. Mm-hmm. They feel threatened about their money, or they struggle with not being in control. Mm-hmm. And so I find that challenge makes it doubly difficult to address some of the things that we see going on in our community, because it is a daunting task to get us to a place where we agree upon something so that we can work together. Secondly, this whole notion of a responsibility we have, a social responsibility to the community in which we live. You know, one of the things that I shared during my years of being a pastor at Star Hill is that our investment in the community was the rent we needed to pay for the space we occupied. That we didn't get to just sit there and to be totally introverted, yes, and to take care of ourselves and to not be concerned about the world around us. That was unacceptable. And I think that unfortunately within inner city communities, we have so many little islands of resources where people have become very self-focused. And there is the social responsibility mindset that you grew up with and that so many of your peers and my peers grew up with. That mindset has been lost in so many instances in our community. And as a result, we are able to be painted as being bereft of resources or a character or all kind of other things, when in reality, in a large way, things are very different. Mm-hmm. But if we would discover or rediscover this ability to work with one another to address some of the issues, and to recognize that I have a responsibility. You know, I grew up in Eden Park. I grew up next door to my great-grandmother, my great-grandfather. Other than my middle school, my 8th grade year when I went to Astruma Middle School, my entire education from child care to kindergarten to elementary school to a year of middle school to high school to college was an African American experience.
Yes, sir.
And so I can't now turn my back on those institutions and those individuals and those communities that shaped me and that molded me. I had absolutely wonderful. My mom's a wonderful woman. Thank God she's still here. My dad was a great father to me. But my community helped to raise me.
Yes, sir.
You know, there were others who sowed into my life. And I think that part of our culture is challenged, if not lost, in today's culture. We have to be concerned about the larger community and not just our small pocket of it.
Entrepreneurship.
Yes, sir.
Versus working for someone else, learning how to work for yourself and provide incomes for other people. To me, historically, that's one of the things that has been lost over the past generations. People are deemed successes, and they are successes, because they get a middle management position in somebody else's firm or company.
Yes, sir.
And they rise to a place where they have a 6-figure income, and they can move and buy homes in different areas of the community and what have you. Nothing wrong with any of that. But to my way of thinking, part of what is missing within the African American community is the desire to be your own boss, to have more self-control of your own destiny. You mentioned this thing about dollars and trust. We don't pool dollars.
No, sir.
Anymore. And as a result, we are fractured. And we find ourselves committed to other entities, to other groupings, I guess, within our community that do not serve us in the long run. And if they do, it's only in a tangential way. And I keep coming back to this whole idea of mentoring and working with young people. Is that something that is addressed in the mentoring program that you all have developed?
Well, so, yes, sir, is the short answer. I will, in a longer way, say that one of the reasons that we are doing the initiative with lawn care and landscaping companies is because we want to strengthen the entrepreneurial presence in inner city neighborhoods, especially entrepreneurial approaches that don't require a high skill level for entry points. Because we have a cadre of individuals, largely young African-American males between the ages of 16 and 24, who in terms of credentials or a manifested skill set, they don't have it right now. Mm-hmm. And so we need to create pathways to meaningful employment, to business ownership for these young men, mm-hmm. That allows them to grow their skills and to use situations that don't require a great skill level to begin. we also need to be very intentional about supporting the capacity of entities in our community who hire from our community. And so one of the things that we do, and it's tied to one of the goals of the Urban Congress, which is about cultivating generational wealth. And so one of the things that we've done is we have convened African American business owners and learned from them what are some of the challenges and barriers they face to expanding their particular business interests, and what are the opportunities that they have to hire from our neighborhoods should they have increased capacity, and how can they support one another so that there are these dollars that are circulating through businesses. And so it's always a joy to see when you invite people to an event and they recognize that I buy this on a regular basis. I didn't know that you sold that. And so now I'm going to buy that from you.
Right.
And so to create those kind of circles of relationship in our community is a really important thing. But those institutions, and I'll use churches for an example, there are a lot of churches in our community that hire people, that have people who work for us.
Right.
When you consider, Shiloh is a major employer
Yes.
in the inner city neighborhood. And so how can we make certain that all of the opportunities for those institutions who hire people are expanded so that people can find employment opportunities in our communities and strengthen our community. We invested in a program that is beginning here. It is the Young Entrepreneurs Academy, and it is a program where high school students spend time learning about entrepreneurship, and they actually get to start their own business. And one of the reasons that we invested in it is because we want to learn from it and to see how we can make certain that young people of color in robust numbers have an opportunity to have that experience and to take some of the entrepreneurial ingenuity that's in people who don't believe in so many instances that it's really there, to give them an opportunity to start businesses. The last thing I will say, I heard a statistic last week, and I thought about it over and over again. The belief that you can become wealthy or well-to-do without credentials or working for someone, the belief in that goes up the higher your income and goes down the lower your income. And so what that means is that people who are of lower income don't believe that they can do something on their own that will allow them to live a good life and provide for themselves.
Right.
And so as a consequence, we are indoctrinated to believe that everybody has to go to college, everybody has to do this, and you know, the days of the shop and automobile mechanics and other things are lost in our community, although to some degree the automotive part is returning with the McKay Center over in Ardendale.
I was having this discussion with my last guest on this podcast, Johnny Jones, who is an entrepreneur in his own right. He's his own entertainer.
Right.
And
multifaceted young man.
Yes. And he started his own air conditioning business. And he works here at the church. He's part of our audio-video ministry. And I asked him directly, did he think that my generation and the generation before mine put too much emphasis on going to college in order to be a success, and that if you didn't go to college or if you were not successful in college, that you could not be a success? And he answered very directly and very mean. Didn't even have to think about it. He said, "Yeah, you've made too much of that you can be successful without going to college." Well, now you say that to certain generations of people,
yes,
and they would say, "Oh no, baby, you got to go to school." There was never a thought in my mind that I wasn't going to college. My parents made it clear I was going to college. They were going to at least give me the opportunity to do that. But I am discovering that with subsequent generations, my own children, and generations that are coming along behind them, college does not necessarily have to be the only path that leads to their success. And that takes rethinking on our part to be open to the fact that there are other avenues where people can be successful.
But not only does it take rethinking on our part, it takes being thoughtful about how do we impact the systems and structures that direct people and direct lives in such a way. And so how do we make certain that our school cultures are able to support those type of pathways in a meaningful way for the young people who are there? How do we make certain that families understand that in a very real way and have access to the resources to understand how to maximize that path? Because unfortunately, in a lot of educational settings, we will say that college is not for everyone, and you can find success here. But, oh, by the way, we're going to invest all of our attention and resources
Yes.
in the kids who are going to college.
Yes.
And you know, we want you to finish, but we're not nearly as intentional about ensuring the success of those young people who are gifted in a different way.
Yeah.
And so I think it is a very large scale rethinking and thinking about the pathways that lead people back to these kind of places.
Let's talk about church for a second.
Yes, sir.
You're a product of the Black Baptist Church. You pastored for 20 plus years a Black Baptist church. I'm a product of the Black Baptist Church. I have not withheld my criticism. I've been critical earlier of white folk. Let's be critical of our own churches. A lot of the things that you are doing with MetroMorphosis and that others are doing within the community, geared towards young people, at one time were being done in the African American church, were being done by African American associations and state conventions, and we have ventured far from that to the place where, in my opinion, associations and conventions have lost their relevancy. Shiloh is a part of the 4th District Missionary Baptist Association. We pay money to the 4th District. We pay money to the Louisiana Baptist State Convention. We pay money to the National Baptist Convention. I have very little faith in any of those groups to work collaboratively for the overall benefit of the very people that we say we are in the business of serving. I'm not asking you to agree or disagree. I'm asking you what kind of support do you see coming from the African American church as a former pastor, as a Christian, as a man who was raised in the African American church? What is your observation?
My observation, Pastor Smith, is that ministries like Shiloh, who sow $50,000 into the lives of young people who are on a track to college to go and to be successful, who invest real dollars in redevelopment in their communities, who are able to connect with entities who are doing things in the community in an autonomous way. And to say, we're not here to ask you to contribute to anything. We are here to put our chips on the table because we are a presence in this community. Those types of ministries that hire 50, 60 people or hired 5 people or 3 people are few and far between. One of the most eye-opening revelations for me in my short life of not being an active pastor is the number of people, especially younger people, for whom the church is of no consequence.
Yes.
It's not that they are angry with or mad at or critical of. It just doesn't matter.
Right.
It's not a factor in their world view,
right,
which is fundamentally different from the worldview that we were brought up in. So that's one observation. The second observation is, I think, the fracturing of the church that we see happening. And by that I mean there are more churches present in inner city neighborhoods than there ever has been, while at the same time our communities are experiencing some of the greatest challenges that they ever have.
Yes. And
there's something fundamentally wrong with that picture. But I find that what has happened is that in so many instances we've gone to our little cubby holes. Mm-hmm. And it becomes about me, my, and mine, and how do we do things financially or otherwise that are good for us. Mm-hmm. And there's no real concern for the world that is around them. I believe that for a serious preponderance of black inner city churches, this is a very dangerous period.
Yeah, the real problem with that is that associations and state conventions were developed for the very reason,
yes, sir,
that you're saying we no longer fit the mold. To do collectively for the benefit of our communities what individual churches could not do, did not have the resources to do, did not have the skill sets to do, to borrow from one another, and to use our collective strength in order to move us to a different quality of life. And somewhere that just got lost, and it became little fiefdoms,
yes,
and little power enclaves that people use to develop themselves and not to benefit the community. And I lament that. I'm a product of the Black Baptist Church, and I'm gonna die a Black Baptist preacher. My father used to say, and I have taken up his word, the bread that fed my children was Baptist bread. And the clothes that they wore were Baptist clothes. I believe in the Black Baptist Church, and I will live and die for the Black Baptist Church. But that does not blind me to the fact that so much of what goes on now within the church falls short of its potential. I'm not going to say that it's all corrupt or that it's all wrong. It just falls short. And I totally agree with you about the fact that for young people, the church has become irrelevant. We have built up celebrities within our own circle. You know, Reverend so-and-so is coming out. And young people are like, I don't know who that is, and don't care.
Yeah.
You know, and it has no meaning whatsoever to them. And we are so out of touch. One of the reasons why I started this podcast is I wanted to find a different avenue by which to have meaningful conversations with people across the spectrum of the community. I'm seeking to learn,
yes, sir,
how to communicate with a generation that says, Reverend, we can take y'all or leave y'all.
Yes.
We really don't need y'all.
Yeah.
You know, and what I want them to understand is you might not need us, but we need you.
Yes, sir.
We want you to be a part of what it is that we're doing. So I just find it so troubling.
It is very troubling. During my life as pastor at Star Hill, one of the things that I would share with people is that if folks have to come to our campus to get everything we got, there's something wrong with that. And so I started by speaking words of admiration for the podcast and for the television ministry that you do and other things. It's a different world. And we sometimes get caught up on the container rather than the content. You know, Jesus talked about new wine and old wineskin, and we become enamored with wineskins rather than the wine. And so we hold on to forms without recognizing the function that drove the creation of those forms.
Yeah.
And so those forms become lifeless and meaningless in the real ministry of the church. And as a consequence, we don't develop new venues, new approaches, without compromising the content, which is the truth of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who died for our sins and was raised from. That never changes. But the way in which that's communicated and the way in which you listen to and share with people has to evolve. Otherwise, you are still, dialing your phone, while people are speaking into smartphones.
Yeah. Well, I have appreciated this opportunity to talk to you. I have appreciated not just here today, but the wisdom that you have imparted to me over the span of years, the support that you have shown to me in both good days and bad, because there have been some bad days.
Yes, sir.
When others abandoned and you stood there, and I'm very appreciative for that. I hope that you'll come back again and share with us again in the future.
I will, and thank you so very much. I consider you a very dear friend and a colleague, and as I always share whenever you post anything about your father, that he was one of the most meaningful influences in my life, and I am forever grateful to the deposit that the Smith family made in my life. And so I am thrilled and honored to be here with you today.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you all for viewing. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back next time.